Now that we've been spending a lot of time with solving quadratics, we're going to learn to go the other way and solve square root equations. So what we're going to do is similar to with square root method, where we would blob our x squared. This time we're going to blob our square root, get that by itself. Then we're going to square both sides, or cube it if it's a cube root, solve the remaining equation, and then we're going to check for extraneous solutions. That has the word extra in it. Don't be extra. That wasn't what I was going to say, but it came out. So what that is when I'm doing my problem, I'm doing it correctly algebraically. You're not making a mistake, like usually when a math teacher tells you to check your work, they mean because you made a mistake. We want to check our work in this because I can actually get an extraneous solution, even though I did my math correctly. Now, the shortcut, if you don't want to have to check, is if you use the blob method, if my blob is equal to a negative, then it's going to be a no solution. So, if you do it my way, it can make life happier, as always. Alright, so let's look at this first one. So I have my blob. So I need to get my blob by itself. So what's my first and only step to get my blob by itself? I'm going to add 3 to both sides. So I have blob equals 3. So my blob is by itself. Is this a positive number? Yes, which means I can keep on going. So square root of 2x minus 1. So just like if I have something squared, I undo it with the square root. With this, if I have something with the square root, I undo it by squaring both sides. So I get 2x minus 1 equals 9. We're going to add 1. We get 10. Divide by 2, and we get x equals 5. So where is my blob here? We aren't going to put the 3 in the blob because it's not under the square root. So my first step is to add 3 to both sides. And if you have a hard time seeing what to do next, literally write an equation to the side. That's 3, I have my blob, minus 3 equals 9. And solve that little equation first if you're having a hard time with these. Okay, back to the regularly scheduled program. 3 times my blob equals 9 plus 3 is 12. How do I get rid of the 3? We're going to divide. Blob equals 4. Is that positive? Yes. Okay, we're good to keep going. So I have square root of 2x is what was really in my blob. And how do I undo a square root? We're going to square both sides. So I get 2x equals 4 squared is 16. And now we're going to divide by 2, and I get that x equals 8. What is different with the problem below it? On the problem below it, we have a square root on both sides. So once you have a square root on both sides, guess what we're just going to do? Square, square. So we get y plus 2 equals 2y plus 5. And then we're going to minus y. Always move your variables first. That's Miss Vance's life suggestion. You know. So y equals negative 3. Now we're going to check and see if that works. So square root of negative 3 plus 2 equals square root of 2 times negative 3 plus 5. On both of these, I'm going to get square root of negative 1. When we're doing these, we don't want any i's, so we're going to say this is no solution. Okay, we want only real numbers, nothing with an I. Alright, what's different in this guy? We got a little cube root. Okay, so I blob it. My first step is to minus 6. Then I have my blob, it's a very technical term, equals 3. So I have the cube root of y minus 4. Now, note, if we have a cube root, it's okay for it to be equal to a negative at this point. Like if it was equal to negative 3, I'd be fine. Because when I cube a negative, I get a negative, and when I cube a positive, I get a positive. The same is not true for squaring. So when I do even powers, I get into trouble. Okay, so I'm going to cube both sides because I have this little 3 right here, which means it's a cube root, which leaves me with y minus 4 equals 3 cubed is 27. So y equals, add 4, 31. Alrighty. Blob it. There you go. I don't know why I'm in a sing-songy mood. Okie dokie. So my first step here, minus 7. Just negative 4. How do I get rid of the negative 2? Careful here. I need to divide by negative 2. Don't tell me to add 2. It's being multiplied to that square root. So my blob equals positive 2, so I can keep going. So I have square root of x plus 3. How do I get rid of a square root? We square both sides. So I get x plus 3 equals 4 minus the 3, and I get x equals 1. Blob it. Teet, 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 teet. I know you're over there loving my sound effects. Awesome. Don't lose this negative. It's still negative blob equals 9. Now, that's really a negative 1 in front, so we're going to divide by negative 1, which gives me that my blob equals negative 9. Da 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 da. No solution, okay? If I'm doing the square root inside my blob, then I can't have a negative. Now let's say I pretended and I didn't know that. Here's what I would do. What would we do next usually? And so I'm going to come over here in green and write what our next step would be. Our next step would have been to do square root of x plus 3 squared equals negative 9 squared. So I get x plus 3 equals 81. So I get x equals 78. And I think that's my answer, but it's not, because if I check that and put that into my equation, 2 minus 78 plus 3, it's not going to equal 11. I'm going to get 2 minus square root of 78 plus 3 would be 81. So 2 minus square root of 81 is 9. And 2 minus 9 is not true. But you're only going to get there if you plug it back in. Are you going to remember to plug it back in? No. So what should we do? Pay attention to if I get to the point where I'm going to square if it's equal to a negative number. Okay? The last situation we need to talk about is when I have this exponent here and it's something like to the 1/2 or to the 3rd. What you need to know is that something to the 1/2 is the same thing as doing the square root of that something. Or something to the 1/3 is the same thing as doing the cube root of that something. That's as deep as we're going to go in this class. So I'm going to blob my parentheses and the 1/2 and do the same thing I've been doing of getting it by itself. So add 12. So 8 times my blob equals 40. Get rid of the 8 by dividing. So my blob equals 5. It's equal to a positive, so I'm good to keep going. Now, at this point, it looks really confusing. So what I suggest doing, take it or leave it, as always, is to rewrite it as the square root of x plus 5 equals 5. Remember, something to the 1/2, this part right here, just means square root. Whatever's inside the parentheses is being square rooted. And now I continue like normal. Square both sides. So x plus 5 equals 25, and minus the 5 over, so x equals 20.